Ukraine's drones striked deep inside occupied Donetsk, December 30th, 2025. A strategic deep strike by Ukraine's specialized drone forces just shattered Russia's plans for a massive winter terror campaign. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. I'm Alex. Join me with Aria in the latest deep dive by Defense Report for a sharp, no-nonsense breakdown of the latest in global defense news, military technology, and strategic developments. And today we're going deep on what the military calls strategic attrition.
We're connecting the dots between some really intense battlefield successes and some incredibly fragile diplomatic efforts. For you, the listener, our mission is pretty clear. We are examining two major, highly effective Ukrainian deep strike operations against critical Russian assets.
And we're talking about both infrastructure and elite human capital.
Exactly. And we're contrasting those surgical strikes with Russia's sustained and frankly indiscriminate winter terror campaigns against Ukraine's civilian electrical grid.
And this is where it gets so complicated. These military facts on the ground are just colliding head-on with the whole diplomatic process. We have confirmed strikes inside occupied Donetsk that demolished a massive drone launch hub.
And at the same time, annihilated an elite Russian special forces unit.
Right. And all of this is happening while diplomats are debating what they're calling a 95% ready peace plan. It's a tense situation.
That's the central tension of this whole deep dive. How do these definitive military achievements, these strategic wins in the rear, how do they immediately become points of leverage? Or maybe points of obstruction in the political talk?
So does Ukraine strike from a position of strength, or does this kind of action provoke an irreversible diplomatic breakdown? Let's unpack the strikes first.
Yeah, let's get into the details.
Okay, let's start with the most recent success. This comes from Ukraine's specialized force, the Unmanned Systems Forces, or the SBS. It's an entire branch dedicated to drone warfare. They've just confirmed a major strike on the ruins of the Donetsk International Airport. Now, for years, that airport has just been this symbol of a grinding, static war. So why now? Why was this scarred piece of earth suddenly a priority target?
Well, because the Russians saw its strategic value as a logistical choke point, and they spent the entire latter half of 2025 turning that ruin into a critical forward operating base.
So not just a ruin anymore.
Not at all.
Yeah.
They were converting the old civilian airport into a comprehensive logistics and launch hub for all their Iranian-designed drones. The Shaheds, the Gerberas, the Girons. This was supposed to be the central point for their entire winter campaign.
And our sources show they were basically building this massive factory and launch pad right
in plain sight, exactly. They were clearing runways, building apartment infrastructure, and even using nearby civilian buildings.
The Metro hypermarket specifically for logistics and weapons storage.
And it was massive weapons storage. This wasn't just a launch site. It was a centralized maintenance and assembly facility. And crucially, they were preparing the main runway for the future jet-powered variants of the Shahed.
So the scale of this whole operation, it was a clear signal. They intended to dramatically increase the tempo of strikes against Ukrainian cities all winter.
And Ukraine just shut it down.
With, surgical precision, this must have taken immense planning.
It did. It was a joint effort. You had elements of the SBS, specifically a unit called Magyar's Birds, working with Special Operations Forces, the SSO, and the missile forces. This was no lucky shot.
So it was preceded by months of intel gathering.
Meticulous intelligence gathering, tracking supply lines, personnel movements, all to make sure they hit it with maximum effect.
And the tactical result was, well, it was undeniable, wasn't it?
Oh, completely. The satellite imagery, the verified intelligence, it all confirmed these powerful secondary detonations. And that's the key. That's how you know you didn't just hit a building.
You hit the munitions, the fuel inside.
Right. Analysts confirmed direct hits on the central warhead warehouse and the fuel reserves. One concrete building was just gone, completely destroyed, and the roof of another one collapsed.
Can you quantify that for us? What's the strategic gain here? Destroying a building is one thing, but what did Ukraine actually prevent?
They executed what we call infrastructure-based denial. The intelligence estimated that facility was stockpiling up to 1,000 Shahed-type drones.
1,000.
And potentially 1,500 warheads. So by taking out the facility itself, Ukraine didn't just stop one wave of attacks. They have severely degraded Russia's operational capacity in that whole region for weeks, if not months.
That's a huge logistical win.
Yeah,
But the insight here, it goes deeper than just the numbers, right?
it does.
Destroying a centralized hub like this forces Russia to immediately disperse whatever assets they have left, which increases their costs, their transport risk. It makes everything more complex for them.
Exponentially. It's a win that keeps costing Russia resources long after the initial explosion. It forces centralization out of their playbook, which slows down their entire decision-making cycle.
And it opens up opportunities for more small, opportunistic Ukrainian strikes on those newly dispersed supply chains. So, shifting focus a little. From hardware to people. This strike highlights a doctrine that's not just about logistics, it's about high-value human targets.
It is, and we're seeing Ukrainian strategy really pivot towards the attrition of specialized human capital. The Bryansk strike a few days ago is the clearest evidence of this.
This is where the long-term strategic damage really happens, isn't it?
Without a doubt. Replacing a piece of hardware is one thing. Replacing a highly trained human asset is, well, it's vastly more expensive and time-consuming. This attack took place on the night of December 26th, also deep inside occupied Donetsk.
And what made that location so valuable?
It was the headquarters and deployment site for the Elite 14th Separate Special Forces Brigade of the GRU. That's Russia's main intelligence directorate.
So not a regular infantry unit.
Not even close. To give you some perspective, this brigade is permanently stationed thousands of kilometers away in Usurisk in the Far East. These are supposed to be Russia's best, most highly trained clandestine operators.
And the cost of that one strike to the Russian operational structure?
It was devastating. The confirmed casualty count was 51 killed and 74 wounded.
So you're talking over 120 elite personnel
taken out in a single night of fighting. Some of our sources indicate that these losses actually rival the GRU's total losses during the entire Chechen wars. For Russia, this is a non-recoverable loss in the short term. Training just one of those officers costs millions of rubles and years of intense instruction.
A loss rivaling the total casualties of the Chechen wars. I mean, for you, listening at home, trying to grasp that scale, what does that actually mean for Russia's ability to conduct complex operations?
It means they lose institutional memory. They lose specialized skill sets. And crucially, they lose unit cohesion. You don't just replace over 100 elite operators with fresh conscripts. You damage your training pipeline for years to come.
So it degrades their ability to conduct those nuanced intelligence and sabotage missions behind Ukrainian lines.
Dramatically. It pushes them back towards less sophisticated, more heavy-handed tactics.
And it perfectly illustrates the disproportionate impact of Ukraine's SBS. The unmanned systems forces are what? Only about 2% of total Ukrainian military personnel?
That's right. And yet intelligence assessments suggest they are responsible for generating roughly 33% of Russian casualties.
That's just a staggering level of efficiency.
It is, and it comes from systematically prioritizing these specialized human capital targets. The drone operators, the electronic warfare technicians, and in this case, the special forces. They're aiming for the brain, not just the muscle.
And this capability, this ability to conduct strategic, deep attrition is really enabled by one critical thing, right? A technological edge.
Yes. The ability to get around Russian electronic warfare systems.
What are the specific advances here that are letting the SBS penetrate these highly protected Russian rear areas with such impunity?
We're seeing the rapid deployment of systems designed specifically to defeat jamming, in particular fiber optic controlled drones, things like the FP1 and the FP2.
And these are now reaching ranges of up to 50 kilometers.
They are. The core advantage here is that they fly along a physical tether, a literal fiber optic cable, which means the control signal is completely immune to Russian electronic warfare.
That physical tether, that's the real game changer. It just bypasses all the jamming that cripples traditional radio-controlled FPV drones.
It does. It allows for that surgical penetration of a deeply protected command post.
But, logistically, doesn't deploying a 50-kilometer fiber optic cable present huge challenges, like retrieval and deployment speed?
Oh, it does. Retrieval is often impossible. So these are essentially one-way suicide drones that just happen to carry their own control cable. And deployment is slower than a standard FPV launch.
But the trade-off is worth it.
For a high-value fixed target like a GRU headquarters, absolutely. The certainty of that signal outweighs the cost and complexity.
The contrast in military doctrine here it's just so stark. It's almost tragic for the Russian troops on the ground. We have sources reporting on Russian counter-tactics that sound completely obsolete.
They're operating on really outdated assumptions about drone tech. There are reports that Russian instructors are still teaching their soldiers these antiquated tactics like freezing or playing dead in the open when a drone is nearby.
And they're telling them to do this because they assume older drone cameras and motion sensors won't pick them up if they stand still.
Exactly. Which is, I mean, it's just utterly ineffective against modern thermal imaging and updated drone optics. It just illustrates this huge speed gap in doctrine.
One force is adapting to EW immunity and thermal capabilities, and the other is still using tactics from, first-generation drones from years ago.
It says a lot about the systemic inability of the Russian military bureaucracy to rapidly integrate battlefield lessons into their training.
So while Ukraine is focusing its resources on precision, deep strike military attrition, what is Russia focusing on? Because we know they're continuing their own strategy of attrition against civilian life.
The pattern of Russian strikes remains brutal and indiscriminately large scale. We've seen these massive strike campaigns, especially in late December. Hundreds of drones.
Up to 519 Shaheds, Gerberas, and others in one go.
Right, alongside dozens of missiles. Iskander Kinsal, KH-101s launched across 13 regions at the same time.
And the sheer volume is just meant to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses. The goal is simple: inflict suffering on millions of civilians by shattering their critical infrastructure.
Precisely. The primary targets, again and again, were energy infrastructure. Power stations, thermal power plants, gas facilities. They also hit key logistics points like railways. We have reports confirming the main railway station in Fasov was severely damaged.
And the humanitarian consequences are immediate, and they are dire. In Kyiv and the surrounding oblast alone, nearly 600,000 residents were left without power.
And that impact just ripples outward. You see cities like Odessa with severe water shortages, these multi-hour queues at distribution centers, because the pumps rely on that damaged power grid.
Meanwhile, in Kherson, the combined heat and power plant was destroyed, leaving people in high-rises with no heat, no power, in the dead of winter.
Our sources really highlight the reality for the most vulnerable there. The story of the so-called cave people, locals who have been living in communal basement shelters for over 2 years now.
2 full years, just living in darkness, relying on volunteers.
And that desperation comes into focus with the smallest details. They'd been using buckets for sanitation for months. Volunteers just recently delivered and installed a desperately needed working toilet.
A working toilet. That small act of restoring dignity in a dark basement, it just illustrates the grinding daily civilian cost of this war.
And the resilience required just to survive.
That anecdote it's a powerful reminder of the human element. It's tough to transition from that emotional reality to a clinical discussion of geopolitics, but that suffering is exactly what informs these negotiations.
It is. All of this intense military action is happening amidst equally intense and often contradictory diplomatic talks involving the US, Ukraine, and Russia. And these military actions are immediately weaponized in the information space.
The biggest piece of information warfare being Russia's counterclaim after the Donetsk strikes. Foreign Minister Lavrov alleged that Ukraine launched 91 long-range drones at Putin's residence in Valdai.
Right, prompting threats that Russia would revise its negotiating stance and had already selected targets for retaliatory strikes.
And what's fascinating is how that claim was deployed. It came out immediately after President Trump and President Zelensky described a positive meeting on the peace framework, which they said was 95% ready.
The timing is never an accident.
And Ukraine's response to this alleged drone attack was immediate and unequivocal.
President Zelensky dismissed the whole thing as a complete fabrication and another lie. He argued it was clearly intended by Moscow to just derail the peace process and justify future massive Russian strikes.
Potentially on Kyiv, on government buildings, all under the guise of retaliation.
Exactly. And this whole informational skirmish just highlights the extreme fragility of the diplomatic process. We know the U.S.-Ukrainian talks are close on security guarantees. A 15-year framework is on the table. But the overall peace deal is still fundamentally stalled.
On key territorial issues.
Precisely. Russia demands Ukraine withdraw from parts of Donetsk and other regions that Russia doesn't even fully control. Ukraine, on the other hand, insists on a ceasefire along the current front line.
So every military fact, from a deep strike on a GRU base to a mass attack on a power plant, is now just a piece of political ammunition in that negotiation.
It is.
The strategic message of Ukraine's drone strikes is therefore pretty clear. Even while peace talks are inching forward, Ukraine is capable of striking deep and profoundly degrading Russia's capacity for more aggression. They are signaling strength.
They're signaling technological superiority at the negotiating table, not desperation. And this conflict in Donetsk highlights the new reality of warfare. Success is now defined by that technological superiority, the EW immunity, the ability to conduct deep attrition, not just by holding ground.
And the juxtaposition. I mean, that surgical GRU strike on irreplaceable elite personnel next to the mass infrastructure attacks on civilians, it underscores the massive stakes here. It is a war of terror met by a war of precision.
The massive losses of those elite, high-value GRU personnel achieved by these relatively small, technologically advanced Ukrainian drone units. It suggests a crucial pivot point in military thinking. Future warfare is going to prioritize the preservation and rapid replacement of machines. Cheap, mass-produced drones over the years-long, expensive investment in highly specialized human soldiers.
So it radically changes the entire cost-benefit analysis of conventional ground forces.
It does. It forces military planners everywhere to reassess what their most valuable resources truly are.
You've been listening to Defense Report by Alex and Arya, where we analyze the latest in military strategy, global defense, and advanced weaponry. Subscribe to Defense Reports, your go-to source for timely, in-depth military and defense reports. We'll catch you next time.